When we think about often in midlife, for example, we've got lowered energy. It's to do with those little battery packs in our cells. I want to come back to mitochondria. When we're looking at VO2 max, just to put it in context as well, I think maybe people don't see the forward of what's happening. So, for example, I think it's the right figure, if I have it, is that if you want to be able to hike in the hills, you need to have a VO2 max of 30 mils per kilo per minute. And when you actually look at the graphs in the scientific literature to see what is the trajectory for someone who isn't exercising and paying attention to this, unfortunately, they've lost that capacity at 70. So it's linked obviously to independence as well and everything you can do, but also just sheer enjoyment. If you travel and you want to be able to do some of these things, it's so important for longevity. Just to kind of contextualize it for people. I think when people think of VO2 max, though, what they associate that with then is endurance and where am I going to find the time to optimize, my fitness routine around that. And we hear a lot about hours of zone 2 training. What you're going to share with us today is the science around the fact that actually, I think it's something like from Martin Gabala's research, 41% of people are non-responders to zone 2. Can you explain a bit more around that?
Yeah, sure. So zone 2 has gained a lot of attention, a lot of traction. It's become a very popular concept, but it probably lacks, or it lacks to some extent the scientific evidence behind it. And some of the recommendations around zone 2 training, they may be great for elite athletes, but are actually not an optimal prescription for the general public. So in zone 2 training, you'd want to stay at a level of intensity. So if you want to be really precise, where you're at your ventilatory threshold or your first lactate threshold. And in kind of easier terms, it's where you can still hold a conversation while you work out. So you can talk but not sing. And some people give advice around what percentage of your maximum heart rate you should be working at. And it varies a lot. Some people say like 60 to 70, others say 70 to 80%. But generally, it's a lower intensity workout that is recommended to do for much longer periods of time, 60 to 90 minutes, and then ideally 4 to 5 times a week. So then you'd suddenly be like 5 to 8 hours per week, zone 2 training. That's very difficult for most people. Even if it's low intensity, by that time, if you spend that much time jogging or spend that much time in a bike seat, at least your behind hurts, yeah? And then what's really problematic is that research shows if you did only that, and if you took basically some of that popular narrative and said like, yes, zone 2, that's the top priority, and I'm really going to focus on that, that 40% of people who do this low to moderate intensity exercise, even for like 2.5 hours per week, will not see an improvement in their VO2 max. So will not respond to that. And that's for spending that much time is, in our view, just not, it's just not good advice to the general public. In defense of the people who are big proponents of zone 2 training, they would, of course, say, yeah, well, you also have to do high intensity training and you have to have a rounded program. But the problem is most people can't do it all. If you objectively measure, it's less than 5% of the population get the recommended amounts of cardio exercise. So that's 2.5 hours of moderate intensity workouts. If you survey them, it's more, but if you objectively measure with wearable devices, it's really very little. And so then giving a recommendation that you should do 5 to 8 hours of low intensity workout, and you can't even be sure that it works for you, is questionable advice.
I think the difficulty as well is that we also have to, the next biggest predictor of longevity, right, is your muscle strength, and then you need good muscle mass. So now for insulin sensitivity as well, and things like that. And so then we've got to come on to, well, how am I going to fit that in? And then on top of that, as you get fitter, you might think, well, actually, like I love lifting weights and things, and doing high intensity, and then I'll go for walks, which is really lovely and, very good for blood flow, but that's not actually really producing strong effects in terms of optimizing mitochondrial turnover and mitochondrial biogenesis, because now it's like, well, it's too low a heart rate. It's lovely going out with my dogs, and it is good for many reasons, but it isn't really kind of getting those mitochondrial improvements that we see from HIIT. And I think then people maybe don't realize, they're not aware of that, so they think, oh, well, I'm doing this level of activity, but that's actually low. It's not even moderate activity in any event, right? So it's a big time bleed then if you're trying to optimize all these things. Before we dive into like how we can use certain types of high intensity exercise, let's go a little bit more around the mitochondria and how this works. I think just explaining the difference between improving the way our existing mitochondria are working, and then also the creation and renewal of mitochondria would be helpful.
Yeah. So when it comes to mitochondrial health, you can look at slightly different characteristics. One is how many mitochondria you have. One is how what size they have, and then that together would be referred to as mitochondrial density. And the next thing is mitochondrial efficiency, so how well those mitochondria work. And there's maybe a slight variation as to what type of exercise works most or best on those different subfunctions. And so there are some opinions that suggest that a lot of zone 2 training helps with mitochondrial density, and that high intensity training has a more robust effect and stronger effect on mitochondrial efficiency. So making the mitochondria you have work better and harder. Ultimately, you want just the ability. So you want both more, larger, and more efficient. And you measure that. VO2 max is then a kind of compound measurement that assesses, that is a measure of your mitochondrial health, really.